All right. So that live chat is actually working. If I pull up my YouTube um, on my ah, on my iPad, then all of a sudden it works. So this is good. Okay, so let's see. Malcolm, right on. Um, do we get to use notes on the test? Well, Malcolm, I'm sorry. No, you don't get to use notes on the test. And that's something that really people have a hard time with, like the first test. People always get all freaked out about this idea of the first test. Um, and they say, hey, I did well on all of the reading quizzes. Well, the reading quizzes, you have notes in front of you, and you can kind of work out of them. But with tests, no, you're on your own. It's what you know, what you're able to pull out, what you're able to do. Like, this is it. It's a test, and so yeah, you kind of got to know your stuff as you go into it. I appreciate the fact that you guys like this. It's working and all that. All right, Celeste, how are the tests set up? Very simple. Well, it's not very simple, but it's pretty simple. This is the first one. So the first one is going to be purely multiple choice. I'm not going to throw any writing at you because we haven't really worked on how to do the writing or anything like that. I'm just going to give you multiple choice. First test is going to be relatively short. It's going to be pretty much shorter than most of the other ones. And throughout the year, we kind of build up and we add writing in, and then we add length in, and we get ourselves ready for sort of the timing of the ultimate, kind of big test of the whole thing. So that's how that goes, is straight up multiple choice. So yeah. Interesting that this, I don't know why the whole group chat thing just isn't working for me. It's weird. Anyway, if you guys want to give me some sort of like some sort of question, all right. Well, hey, I have people who are not in my class watching this. Emily Carranza. Hey, you're European. I don't like the fact that you're saying makes us watch your videos. I sort of hope you'd like to watch them. I hope they're helping. But yeah, that's great to hear. All right, best ways to study for a test. My advice is use the study guide that you have. Use the materials that are at your disposal. Use the notes you've been taking in class. Use the notes you've been taking while you read the book. Use your notes that you've been taking while you've been watching the videos. Whatever it may be, use whatever notes you have. And just know it. If you've been keeping up with the flashcards, then these tests are pretty heavy on the vocabulary. So you want to know the vocabulary terms that are really big for this chapter. And there's some fairly basic ones. So you kind of just go through and you hit this point as you're studying that you're like, yeah, I know, I kind of get this stuff and I understand all of that. Yeah, big vocabulary portion. It's not there's a different portion, Malcolm. It's just that that a lot of the types of questions that are asked on the exams tend to have like vocabulary right at the center of them, So which it might be a question, and this is just off the top of my head. Don't think that these are like test tips or anything, but it might be like, which is the best definition of political socialization, or which is the best example of political socialization, and then this gives you a few, or which is not one of the traditional characteristics of a democracy, and you might have that. So yeah, that's kind of where the vocabulary comes in. I mean, if you don't know the terms, then you don't really get what the what's happening as we go. How many questions are there in total? There'll probably be somewhere between 25 and 30. I'm going to kind of gauge how ready you guys are for this one. I usually go about 30 on the first test, but it's only so much material in the first chapter, so you tend to get a little bit of overlap. How about some questions about the actual topics. Like, is there stuff that you guys didn't understand as we're going through? Are there things that I didn't make clear? And are there things that I can really help you understand? That's sort of the big value of something like this. I mean, we can talk about the sort of like the difference, like sort of government, politics, power, legitimacy, sort of like those basic concepts. We can talk about this idea of the social contract, and why that's important for American democracy. We can talk about what democracies are versus different types of governments. We can talk about different theories about how our democracy actually works. We can talk about what you guys are reading this weekend about political ideologies and the differences, the different types of ideologies out there. And we can push forward if you want to and talk about the sort of the challenges that are faced by a democracy and all that. You guys are asking these questions that are very specific. Yeah, reading quizzes, they're all there. They're graded. They're ready for you. All you got to do is come and get them. So what is it that you don't understand? I mean, let's make this valuable time. What is it that you have a question about? And don't be afraid to ask questions, because that's what this is all about, as I seem to be losing viewers left and right. Someone finally put something out. All right, pluralism and all that groovy stuff. Okay, so I'm going to do this the best I can without like visuals, and maybe there's a way I can bring in visuals. I don't know. All right, so basically, like the whole idea behind this pluralist, hyper-pluralist, and elitist theory thing is that there are attempts to explain what actually happens in our government. I mean, there's a lot of rhetoric about this being a democracy and, everybody having equal say. And, we push that image out to the world. And the question is like, is that really what's going on in this country or not? So you got basically three theories. The first one is the pluralist theory. And the pluralist theory is the one that kind of is the most optimistic of the three. It says basically that there are lots and lots of groups of people out there who care about different issues. And people care about more than one issue, obviously, but lots of people care about different issues. And we have an open government that's open to listening to the viewpoints of all people. So we band together in things called interest groups, which is basically just groups of people that share an interest. And those interest groups then sort of like compete for the interest or compete for the attention of politicians, and politicians listen to interest groups from all sides on an issue, and then they make sort of the most informed decision that's the best for the country. Kind of everyone has access. All you have to do is kind of organize and get yourself in the door and you're good to go. So pluralism is really kind of optimistic. We all have a say, we all can make a difference, all that. Elitism, less optimistic. It basically says that people who have power and influence are the ones who actually run the country. They're the ones who are campaigning or who are donating to campaigns. They're donating lots of money to the campaigns. There's two guys named the Koch brothers, big donators to the Republican Party. I mean, they've donated millions and millions and millions of dollars to campaigns each campaign cycle. And it's sort of hard for a lot of people to understand why people would donate that kind of money, but it's to gain influence. And so in an elitist theory, if you believe it, then you believe that really you and I and most normal Americans really don't have any say in what government does. Like, we can write all the letters we want to, we can call congressmen, we can do all of that, but it doesn't ultimately matter because they're not going to listen to us because we're not donating lots of money. And people who donate lots of money, they make a phone call to, Senator so-and-so's office, and they're not getting the secretary, they're getting right into the senator. Or maybe they even have his personal cell phone number and they can call him whenever and he'll answer their calls. That's elitist theory. And then, of course, hyper-pluralist theory is kind of like a pluralist theory gone wrong. It's like everyone has a voice, but there's too many voices, and there's too many ways that people can express their opinion. And if they don't get what they want with the law, then they can take it to court, and they can attack it at the local level, the state level, the national level. They get, like, there's too many things going on, and so you have all of these different places, and just it's a mess. And it ends up either in like too many laws being passed that really don't accomplish much, but they're a good show for re-election campaigns, or there's gridlock where, one party or one group of people just kind of digs in and says, we're not going to vote for this because, we got too many people who are telling us not to. And so you don't really get an effective, responsive government out of it. So I hope that helped. Let's see. The difference between government and politics. Very simply, it's this. Government is like the type of stuff you can see. They're institutions. They're, you can see Congress. It's a building where people who are elected go. They make the decisions. This is government in action. And it doesn't have to be elected officials. You can see government in action when you go to the national park and, there's the guy who's, giving you the tour of, I don't know, Independence Hall, or the park ranger out at Zion National Park in Utah, or Yosemite in California, or something like that. These are that's the federal government at work. When you see military operations, that's government, right? It's all about making things happen. Politics is simply a way to gain power and to get into government so that you can do those things. So it's a process. And we have very strict rules in the political process to try and make it as fair as possible, and to try and keep corruption and all that kind of stuff out of the whole game. So what you have is people who play the game of trying to gain power, whether that's through gaining votes or whether that's through, whatever. Politics is there. It even goes on when you're in government. People try and play the news. They try and get their faces on there. They try and get their opinions out there. They're always trying to gain power through politics. So that's the difference between those two things. Is limited government in place because too many people want power in our system? All right, limited government is in place because, guys, we came from a system where there was some limited government, but the founding fathers really didn't feel like it was limited enough. The English system had a lot of safeguards in place and limits on its kings. They had an English Bill of Rights. They had the Magna Carta. They had things like that. And you don't really need to worry too much about like the specifics of those things. Understand that like there were guaranteed rights to people for the most part. It didn't really apply to everybody, but yeah. But when the whole independence thing went down, and the British cracked down on the colonists felt like they didn't have any say whatsoever in what was going on. And so because they didn't feel like they had any say, they went ahead and decided to put real specified limits on the government. And so they wrote a constitution which basically lists things the government can do. It specifically says the government is allowed to do this. The president may do this. Congress has these powers, and only those powers. They kind of throw it off a little bit with the whole elastic clause, but we'll get to that in the next chapter. But like the idea is they've written into the system real limits on the power so that the government or individuals in government can't take too much power. Plus, they also break it up in so many different ways that it's almost impossible to control the whole government. You got three branches at the national level. States can make decisions on lots of things. It's separated up all over the place. So that's really why the limited government thing comes about. The nice thing is when you write it down and it's in a document that we all can have easy access to, you can get a little app on your phone where you see the Constitution and it's in the back of your textbook, whatever. Like we can look there and we can say, this says this, you're violating the Constitution. That doesn't always mean that we get we sort of like get what we want, but we try. what are the pros and cons of majority rule? Well, the pros are that if you have majority rule, then like, I mean, it's sort of a rational way to do things. If most people want something, then give it to them. You know, this is a democracy. That's how democracy should function, et cetera, et cetera. You know, let's let's make it work that way. You know, that's the good thing about majority rule. And I mean, typically, majority rule is a pretty good idea to have. However, once you start with majority rule and you put no limits on it, then the majority can do things to the minority, you know? And we can talk about racial minorities and we can talk about slavery. I mean, this was a majority rule thing. There was no safeguards against slavery, you know? And the majority of voters, who, by the way, were all white, you know, they wanted slavery, or at least they were not, you know, adamantly vocal about it until, of course, you know, you roll up towards the Civil War. So majority rule is good, but there have to be limits on what the majority can do. And so, you know, you want to make sure that people don't get hurt in the majority rule thing. And every now and then you see something come up, and it's been in the news lately, with the whole what they call religious freedom laws. Okay, the Supreme Court ruled that denying gay marriages was unconstitutional. So states had to stop denying gay marriages. And then you had this question of like, well, okay, so what about the example that was one of the first ones was a caterer. You know, here's a religious Christian caterer, didn't feel that gay marriage was, you know, a moral thing, and so this caterer, you know, didn't want to cater gay weddings, and so this, you know, a bunch of businesses lobbied the state for a religious freedom law, which says that if you're for religious reasons want to deny services to a group of people, then you can do so, if it violates your religious beliefs. And then you get in the question of, you know, like, is that a good thing, to be able to just say, hey, I don't want to do it for this reason, and deny those services to those people. Doesn't sound very American, but the majority of voters in the states that passed those laws were pretty okay with it. It's a long answer, I know. Let's see. Why is limited government a central pillar of our American system of government? It's a good thing to have. It really is. I mean, you can't imagine how nice it is to have that written constitution that government officials have to follow. You know, and even on the campaign trail, I mean, you'll hear both presidential candidates and they'll say, you know, hey, if I'm elected, then I can so and so. And, you know, a lot of it is stuff that they'd like to do, but that they, as president, he or she, as president, cannot actually do alone, you know? They need Congress to do a lot of this stuff. And so it's, you know, it leads to a lot of misconceptions because you hear things that people might not be able to follow up on. But it also kind of shows, like, you know, there are limits, and they're written in there. And if you follow the Constitution, you do what the Constitution says, then you got to follow the limits, you know. All right, a key difference between conservative and liberal. I'm just wondering, I'm just going to take a quick little check here, because there is a thing where you know, those are the links to that thing. I'm just interested to see. There's a way that I can actually see you guys and you can like ask me questions. Wouldn't that be cool? Let's see. No, that isn't it. That isn't it. That's the control room. Yeah, no, that's not what we want. No, I don't know how to do this. Oh, well, be much cooler if we could. Okay, well, oh, wait a minute. Maybe I can. Okay. Anyway, key difference between a conservative and a liberal. All right, understand that everything here is relative. You know, there's conservatives in America and liberals in America, and generally that has nothing to do with conservative and liberal, like on the global spectrum. But we don't care about the global spectrum in this class. This is like American government, right? So the key difference between, I mean, there's lots. I mean, you know, they differ on lots of issues. But I would say that the key difference between a liberal and a conservative is that liberals look to solutions for problems facing the United States by government intervention. In other words, if we come up with the right government programs, then we can come up with solutions to the problems that we need solutions to. That usually involves more taxes. It usually involves more cost. You know, the government spends more money. The government tends to get larger. All those sorts of things. Whereas a conservative is going to kind of say, people need to solve their problems themselves a little bit more. Now, they're not saying get rid of government. They're not saying, you know, don't do anything. There's obviously lots of things that government has to do that people can't do by themselves. National defense. I mean, you know, what are you going to do? You know, there seems to be a problem here. You know, if you're interested in going to help, grab your gun and hop on the next flight to Syria. You know, it's not going to work. But when it comes to things like public housing or you know, gosh, my mind's going blank. Public housing or welfare, food stamps, you know, those sorts of things. Conservatives are typically going to say, hey, you know, go get a job and start working, and then you can pay taxes and you can afford these things, you know. And we understand some people are going to be down on their luck at times, but we have too many people that we're giving too many freedoms to. You know, so generally speaking, conservatives favor less government involvement, which typically means less taxes and less government spending. And that's basically your conservative kind of view of the world. Now, it's way more complex than that, but I mean, if you kind of want to get in your head like the main difference, there it is. You know, liberals think liberals want to solve problems through government action, generally speaking, and conservatives want to solve problems through individual action and put the responsibility on people. Is America more liberal or conservative right now? Celeste, I don't know. I mean, the things that we do, I will say this, all right? And this is something that I think is going to be a theme throughout the year. America has become more liberal over time. The big shift, there's like two big shifts that you see in American history. Number one comes along during the Great Depression. You know, we're in this horrible situation. I mean, to be honest, it looked like capitalism was failing. It looks like the whole system was collapsing. People are out of work. They're losing jobs because the people who haven't lost all their money are kind of pulling back and shutting down production and all of that. So they're not hiring as many people. They're firing more people, which means people have less ability to to get jobs, you know, and all of these things are kind of happening at the same time. So along comes FDR. Franklin Delano Roosevelt introduces the New Deal and starts using this thing called Keynesian economics, which is basically you spend in times of depression as a government to get sort of everything going. And then in good times, you sort of back off on all the programs and everything. So they create all these programs, which are government sponsored, in order to create jobs. They build dams, they build, you know, trails, they they build homes. I mean, they're building projects all over the place. And then they create Social Security, which is, this very sort of liberal thing to create, which gives retirement benefits to people. The second big move comes in the 1960s during the Johnson administration, when he sort of creates the war on poverty. And this escalates all of the social welfare programs that we have today, to try and fight poverty from a government standpoint. We're gonna end this. We're gonna force it through. And so it opened up a lot more government spending. And at this point, I mean, for better or for worse, and you decide whether you think this is a good thing or a bad thing, but the majority of the federal budget goes in payments to individuals. There are positives and there are negatives to this. Positives are those people who are getting money are not forced into the workforce. If you have a 95-year-old grandmother who's living on Social Security and Medicare, she doesn't have to try and find a job at 95 because she's covered. That's probably, for most people, a good thing. There are also then the negatives, that you have people who take advantage of the system and are on 4 or 5 different social programs at the same time, and taking far more than their share and not really making an attempt to, try and push forward in life. So it's really an outlook kind of thing, whether you like that or not. What are or is a key difference between aristocracy, oligarchy, and elitism? Because they all seem extremely similar. They are similar. All right. An aristocracy is typically, an aristocracy and oligarchy are types of governments, okay? Or at least they're the way that political scientists would classify governments. So if you have an aristocracy, then you've got like some sort of privileged group that actually runs everything. And then this is sort of more a European style, and it's very foreign to us. But people who are born into families that have titles, Lord so and so, they're the ones who make all the decisions. They're the ones who run everything, and everybody else kind of just follows along and gets what they can out of life. That's an aristocracy. It is sort of like elitist theory. If you want to put, aristocracy into the United States, the problem is, elitist theory is not a form of government. It's a theory about how our government might actually work. So that's the difference there. An oligarchy is a small group of people who run the government as a small group. The difference between it and an aristocracy, you could have a small group of aristocrats who run the country, and then you've got sort of an aristocratic oligarchy, I guess. We'll just stick with aristocracy. An oligarchy could be like anybody. And oftentimes what you find is oligarchies are not necessarily aristocracies. So like in Soviet Russia, there was a group called the Politburo, who was sort of this inner circle of Communist Party members who ran the government. And they had a premier who was, sort of the president, basically, of the Soviet Union, and the premier was the one who was sort of on TV. The premier was the leader. The premier was everything. But the Politburo made all the decisions, and the premier was part of the Politburo. But there were times where a premier would die, and the Politburo wouldn't sort of let the information out for maybe a month, maybe a few weeks, because they wanted to get figured out who was going to take over before they sort of let the world know that the premier of the this superpower had died, because there wasn't a real solid system in place, I guess, for finding a new premier. Which is a great thing about having constitutions, because there's always a system in place. If one of our presidents, God forbid, dies, bam, we know exactly what to do. It's all written. The instructions are right there. Boom, you got yourself a new president. You can tell everybody like moments after it happened, because it's, the system is the system. But more often than not, what you find with an oligarchy is that it tends to be sort of a military takeover, and military, like a group of generals will be taking control and they'll be running things. So yeah. All right. I have run out of questions here. And according to me, there's only 5 of you watching. That's awesome. I can't believe you guys spending your Sunday night like this. Do we have any other questions that anybody wants to ask? Something you don't understand? Something that you need clarified? Even if I already went through it. I mean, we can certainly do it again. No doubt. You see, I love it when someone comes through for me like that. All right, in what way is eminent domain constitutional? It has the feel of revolution time in America, when soldiers could live in anyone's home without the owners having any choice. Okay, eminent domain has nothing to do with people living in your home. The Third Amendment of the Constitution says that the government can't house troops in people's homes, period. And they've never tried to do it, so it's never been challenged in court. And anyway, no, it's not that. Eminent domain means this: the ultimate owner of the land in the United States is the federal government, and the next owner is the state government, and they can take your land if they need to. Now, look, if the government went around taking people's land on any sort of a regular basis, or on anything resembling a regular basis, we just wouldn't stand for it, right? But where this comes into play usually is when a government is trying to put in, let's say, a new freeway, and they want this thing to go nice and straight so that people can go fast. I mean, you've been on freeways, that's how they work, right? And so you have to buy up land in order to have the freeway. Well, in the midst of all of this, you're buying land from people, and they have to offer a fair price. The government, offers homeowners a fair price for their house, and they give them, moving expenses, and they try and help them out. So let's say, there's a 5-mile stretch that's connecting two freeways, and, you're buying up all this land, and you got one person who owns a farm, or even, they have a house, and the house is right in the way of the freeway. Well, the freeway is not going to work if you have to go around this person's house. And let's face it, this person probably wouldn't be too happy if a freeway started going right around their house, and literally around their property line. And so what the government can then do is invoke eminent domain and say, look, we've offered you the money for you to sell the house. You've said no. It's a fair offer. There's nothing wrong with it. It's ours. We're still going to pay you what we offered. I mean, it's not like they just take it away. I'm going to pay you what we offered, and then we're going to build that nice straight freeway, which is going to be better for the whole state, or, if it's a big one, than the whole part of the country or whatever, in terms of transportation. And so that's what eminent domain is that, like, ultimately government can make that decision to sort of take the land that they are the ultimate owners of, but they have to take it at a fair price. They can't just come in and, like, evict people and, kick you out and give you nothing. That's not how it works. So how is it constitutional? Well, right in the Constitution, it says it's constitutional. So that makes it constitutional, which is really something that, you sort of have to understand, is that when you think constitutional, and this is one thing people kind of slip up on in the class. When you think in terms of what's constitutional versus what's not constitutional, it's not whether you believe it's right or wrong. It's whether you look at the words in the Constitution and see it's there. When there was, when there was an effort to end gay marriages in the early part of, the 2000s, there were proposals to create a constitutional amendment that in the Constitution defined marriage as a union between one man and one woman. And therefore it would be there, and it would be constitution that like that's the Constitution. And so any state that passed a law that went against that law would immediately be unconstitutional, because it said it in the Constitution. But it never really gained traction enough to be able to be a national issue that ever really even got out of Congress, which is sort of the first stage you have to go through. So that's sort of the constitutional thing is not necessarily whether you agree with it or not, it's whether it says it in the Constitution. And I mean, if you think about it realistically, eminent domain makes sense, because ultimately we're all going to benefit from that straight freeway, all the people who travel on it, which is going to vastly outnumber the one or two people who simply refuse to sell their land. And it causes conflict, and it's tough for some people, especially if it's if it's land that their family has owned and farmed for generations. It's tough, and I'm not saying that it isn't, but it's how it works. All right, give me another one. Let's keep this thing rolling. Boy, we're having fun now, aren't we? Well, I guess then, I mean, if another question pops up, then I'll certainly keep going, but it looks like I've answered most of the questions of the people who are here. But the other thing I kind of want to get an idea of is, like, is this an effective way to help you guys understand things? If this is going to work, if this is something that works for you, if you kind of like this, then I'm willing to do it, because I can reach a lot more of you this way, and I can reach you like almost immediately, and we just kind of just set this up as a regular thing. You can also view this as many times as you want to, because it's just going to show up on my YouTube page. So that's certainly a possibility. And all of a sudden I'm getting questions here. Okay. Can you explain the idea of a political ideology? All right. So political ideology really is like how you think about what government should do. And here in America, we tend to talk liberal conservative because we live in a country which pretty much agrees on most things, and the things that we argue about are things that, as I've told many people many times, there are lots of people around the world, a vast majority of the world would literally kill in order to be able to argue about the things that we think are pretty important. But an ideology is sort of a set of beliefs that you hold about politics, and it ranges everything from your extreme liberal side, which is communist, socialist, maybe. You can keep on going from there, but let's just leave it at that, because those are words which are fairly familiar. Jumping over to the other side, which would almost be a reactionary, like, let's take away a lot of the laws, and maybe libertarian is a good way to put that. Sort of government does as little as possible, regulates almost nothing, and spends very, very little money. And everyone's political ideology is slightly different. We think in terms of liberal and conservative because it's easy, and because we only have two parties. That's the way our Constitution really, it kind of sets the rules so that it works that way. And there, you might agree with one party on most things, but another party on another one. But generally speaking, people like to put themselves in one of those two categories, or increasingly just call themselves independents, but still vote for one of the two parties that are the main ones. So that's what a political ideology is. It's like that set of beliefs. So what do you believe about the government's role in legalizing abortion? What do you think about the government's role in healthcare? What do you think about the government's role in intervention in other countries? What do you think about, and it's all those things, and you put them together, and be in my class tomorrow, you're going to find out a lot more about political ideology. We have a question about what is the incumbency advantage? This is coming from someone who's not one of my students, and obviously you guys are moving ahead a little bit. So an incumbent is someone who's already in office. For those of you who are in my class, here's a preview. An incumbent is someone who's already in office, okay? So it's all of these people who are senators and representatives right now. They're running for re-election, and they're going to go out there and they're going to try and get that re-election. And they have lots of advantages over people who are trying to challenge them for office. For example, they can sit there and they can say, hey, look, I've been in office. Look what I've done for you. You know, they can claim credit for all kinds of stuff that they've done, you know, even sometimes claiming credit falsely. People have done that before. They can use they usually have bigger campaign funds. They have greater name recognition, so that people, you know, have heard of them and they haven't heard of this other person. So even if they're uneducated, having just heard the name of the person helps along with that. And then they also have this thing called the franking privilege, which is like they can mail stuff to their constituents, non-campaign materials, for free. So how's that an advantage? Well, you don't put the words vote for on the flyer you send to everyone in your state if you're a senator, or everyone in your district if you're a representative. You just tell them what you're doing and how great a job you're doing, and you let them know that. So incumbents have huge advantages. And in places like Congress, in the House of Representatives, re-election rates are typically above 90%, usually 92 to 97% re-election rate in elections where every single one of the 435 members is up for re-election. So you can see that the advantage exists. All right. Let's see. Are the certain facets of direct democracy viable in nationally just barely used or just specific states, such as California? Oh, I gotcha. I gotcha. Would direct democracy actually work on a large scale in the United States? I tell you what, give me 1 second because I need to plug in my laptop and I don't know where I put my cord before this thing runs out of juice. Here's my cord. So yeah, is it going to work nationally? Well, I suppose it could. You might hit sort of a breaking point on some things. Hold on. There we go. All right. You might hit a breaking point on some things. In other words, the initiative process would be a real mess. States that have initiatives in them have a threshold of signatures you need to get of registered voters. Okay, so let's say that the threshold is 10% of registered voters. Now, on a state scale, even if you're talking about a state like California, that's a doable thing. And you can hit like the major markets. You can hit the big cities of San Diego, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, and you can probably get enough signatures to get something on the ballot. When you're talking about 10% of the electorate in the United States, let's say that of the 320 million people in the United States, that 200 of them, and I'm really, really, really being optimistic there, but let's say 200 of them are registered voters, 200 million. So you'd need 10% of that, which is 20 million signatures. So that would be much harder to get and much harder to organize. It could work, I suppose, but yeah, I'm not seeing that one work all that well. The recall process could happen. Of course, the problem is with national attention, like on the state level, you know, it's not as heated. On a national level, I mean, I could almost see every single election being contested. You know, in the fall, I don't care who wins, Trump or Clinton, you know, immediately the supporters of the other side start a recall campaign and they get enough signatures. in order to get a recall campaign going, a recall vote going. So then you got to hold it. You got to have a whole nother recall thing going on. I'm not thinking that it would work. But this is just like, this is all theoretical, because in order for it to work, it would have to be written, in order for it to happen, it would have to be written into the Constitution. And I'm not seeing that happening anywhere. It's much easier to do on a state level, and only a few states do it, and they don't do it all, well, they don't do the recall thing very often, but the referendum and initiative thing they do. Let's see, is it written in ink that all states can use? Oh yeah, no. The direct democracy things, the recall, initiative, and referendum, those are only states, and there's only a handful of them that have those laws. States make their own laws for themselves, and as long as they don't violate national law, and as long as they don't violate the Constitution, then like the states can make their own laws. And so what happened is, the early part of the 20th century, there was a whole lot of corruption in government. So there was a really big populist movement to try and like bring more power to the people. And some of it was nationally done. You know, there were a lot of corruption laws which were put into place. A lot of, monopolies were broken up because they had too much power. The 17th Amendment made it so that for the first time, senators were directly elected by the people, and they weren't elected by the state legislators. But that's the time when these handful of states went in and put these direct democracy pieces in them, and sometimes they've backfired. You know, sometimes the will of the people is not exactly best for the country, and it's what the founding fathers kind of really believed. I mean, they believed that politicians should listen to the needs of the people, but ultimately you wanted to elect people who were like had sound judgment and who were intelligent and educated and could make the best decisions for the people, which is, you know, a controversial sort of idea today. I mean, it's not controversial because we still have it, but you know, the idea that we can't all make the decisions and that there's someone better, you know, but they kind of did that, and it works, you know. Why mess with it, I guess. So, so that's kind of the initiative, referendum and recall thing. Is it's a state-based thing. I mean, you know, it's mostly a West Coast thing. I swear I think Colorado and Wisconsin have it, but off the top of my head, I'm not sure. All right, so Solomon is out. He's had all his questions answered. Good. That's what I'm hoping to do. And actually we're sort of rolling up on 9 o'clock here. I kind of thought maybe an hour would be a good length of time here. So if you still have a question, now's the time to ask. I'll just wait. Actually, I'll just have a little drink. So anyway, that's kind of like the introduction to government. Look, if you're really trying to understand this whole thing, understand what government is, understand why it exists, understand that the idea of a social contract, the idea that the people have responsibilities to the country, and that the country's government has responsibilities to the people is an important concept. You know, understand that while we have a democracy, we don't have a pure democracy, and in many people's eyes, we don't even have what would be defined as a traditional democracy. Our democracy actually functions in a different way. Understand that, I'm trying to think of all the different things that we've talked about here. Understand that there is a variety of opinion in the United States, and that everybody has different opinions on different issues. And you're going to find yourself, you know, favoring one side sometimes and another side at other times. And that's sort of the way it is. And understand that throughout this entire course, throughout this year, we're going to be sort of trying to make sense of how things are supposed to function according to what's written and how things do function. And sometimes that's exactly what happens. More often than not, not quite. So yeah. Let's see. How much does the economy affect laws and can they change votes? Oh, yes. Listen, here's a good rule of thumb. Presidents who are up for re-election, and this trickles down a little bit. Presidents who are up for re-election, if the economy's good, they're probably going to win. If the economy's bad, they're probably going to lose because they're going to get blamed for it. Whereas if the economy's good, they're going to take credit for it. So the economy really plays into it. And the other side of it is that if the economy is doing well, if people have jobs and people have money and prosperity and they see sort of like a viable future, then they're not going to really like push for change. They're not going to, they might not even vote, they might just be very happy with the way things are. But when the economy goes down, people start losing their jobs and all of that, they look for more desperate solutions, and depending on how you look at it, we are either in a good situation in the United States today or we're in a bad situation in the United States today. The Democrats are telling us, look, we're in a good situation. America works, there's nothing wrong with America. I mean, we have our problems. I'm not saying nothing's wrong with America, but we have our problems, but the system works and we don't need to make it great again because it is great. The Republicans are saying, or this is a little bit more Trump than the rest of the Republican Party, but let's simplify, right? Are saying that America's failing, and that there are so many large problems that we need someone to come in and make it what it once was, which is a great country. And there are people who believe both of those things. And, who's to say whether they're right or not? It's all a matter of perspective. I mean, look, if you've got a job and you're prosperous and you're doing okay, then you probably think America's all right. If you're struggling to find work and you can't seem to get ahead, then you probably think that America needs to be great again because you look back in the past and you go, yeah, my dad always had a job or whatever. And that's what your ideology is based on. So I have all of the kids' bedtime stories and stuff like that. And yes, as of tomorrow morning, I will be the father of a middle school child. It's pretty scary. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and kill this thing. So, hey, I hope this helped. I hope you guys really got into it. You enjoyed it. I hope you had your questions answered. And then, you can flip this back and watch again, see if my explanations make sense. If not, please watch the videos that I've made for you. And also don't be afraid to ask questions in class because, if you're in my class, then I'm willing to answer questions and I can talk all day. And if you're not in my class, then I'm sure you have a teacher who is just the same. So just don't ever be afraid to ask questions and don't ever be afraid to stand up and say, hey, this doesn't seem right, or I don't understand this. And, be a part of it because more than anything else, this class, the whole concept of American democracy falls apart if no one participates. Because then you just kind of sit back and let other people make all the decisions for you. That leads down a very dangerous road. Your big brother might be watching. Anyway, have yourselves a great night. Thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you real soon. Take care.